You were always the anchor, Rachel, dragging me down. I need to fly." That was the last thing he said to her before signing the papers that left her with nothing but her maiden name. But they say the best revenge isn't anger. It's success so blinding that the person who broke you has to squint just to look at you. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we have a story about ambition, betrayal, and the kind of comeback that nightmares are made of. For the ex, that is. If you've ever been underestimated, this one is for you. Let's get into the story of Rachel Coleman and the night everything changed. The sound of the pen scratching against the heavy bond paper was the loudest noise in the room. It was an aggressive, rhythmic sound. Scritch, scritch, snap, final and sharp, like a scalpel severing a limb. It echoed in the vast, sterile silence of the conference room on the 45th floor, a space designed to intimidate. Ethan Moore didn't look up as he signed the final page of the divorce settlement. His movements were precise, practiced, and devoid of hesitation. He signed his name with a flourish, the E looping large and dominant, the M jagged and assertive. He was a man who prided himself on efficiency, on clean lines and structural integrity, and in his eyes, this marriage had become a structural liability, an inefficient asset that was bleeding equity and needed to be liquidated. Rachel Coleman sat across the mahogany table, a slab of wood so wide it felt like a canyon separated them. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, knuckles white against her beige slacks. She wasn't crying. Ethan had expected tears. In fact, he had banked on them. He had prepared for a scene, rehearsing a speech about conscious uncoupling and divergent trajectories in the mirror that morning while shaving. He had a silk handkerchief ready in his breast pocket, a prop for the benevolent victor, comforting the hysterical loser. But her silence unnerved him. It wasn't the silence of shock. It was the silence of a vacuum, sucking the oxygen out of the room. It made the hum of the high-tech air conditioning system sound deafening, a low-frequency drone recycling the dry, cool air of the city, keeping the atmosphere preserved and lifeless. "There," Ethan said, sliding the documents across the polished surface toward his lawyer, Noah Bennett. The papers hissed as they moved. Noah, a man with a jawline sharp enough to cut glass and a conscience flexible enough to sleep soundly at night, offered a sympathetic nod that didn't quite reach his eyes. He tapped the stack of papers on the table to align them, a compulsive, tidy motion. "Rachel," Noah began, his voice smooth, like expensive whiskey poured over ice. "Per the agreement, the timeline is rigid. You have 30 days to vacate the residence. The keys to the Hamptons property have already been transferred to the trust, which, as you know, excludes you." Ethan leaned back in his leather chair, the leather creaking under his weight. He adjusted his cufflinks, platinum, a gift from his new business partner, Oliver Hayes. He finally allowed himself to look at her. Really look at her. She looked small in the oversized executive chair. She was wearing a beige cardigan that had seen better days, the wool pilling at the elbows, and slacks that were sensible, not stylish. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, messy bun, strands escaping to frame a face devoid of makeup. She looked, for all intents and purposes, like the invisible woman he needed her to be, a relic of his past, a rough draft he was discarding for the final masterpiece. "As agreed," Noah continued, flipping to page 42, "the settlement is modest, but fair given the prenuptial terms you signed 7 years ago. The jagged equity split is unfortunate, but legally binding. You receive the 2018 sedan, the contents of your personal studio, excluding any intellectual property created during the marriage, which belongs to Moore and Associates, and a lump sum of $50,000. $50,000. It was an insult. It was less than the retainer for the PR firm Ethan had just hired. But Rachel didn't flinch. She just stared at the watermark on the table. "It's for the best, Rach." "You know that," Ethan said, his tone shifting to one of patronizing kindness. He needed her to agree. He needed her to absolve him. "My firm is expanding into Asian markets. The Tokyo bid is happening next month. The travel, the galas, the international press. It's a lot. It's a velocity you've never been comfortable with. You've always preferred smaller things." "Smaller things," Rachel repeated. Her voice was low, raspy from disuse. It wasn't a question. It was an echo of the box he had put her in for 7 years. The smaller things were the nights she stayed up until 4 a.m., fixing the structural calculations on his blueprints because he was too drunk on his own hype to check the math. The smaller things were the quiet sacrifices of her own career, turning down a fellowship in Milan so she could manage his office when his first assistant quit. The smaller things were the invisible pillars holding up his entire sky. "Yes, you're a homemaker at heart, a supporter." "And that's fine," Ethan said, checking his watch, a Rolex Submariner he'd bought to celebrate his first $1 million, a million made on a project Rachel had named. "But I need a partner who understands the stakes, someone who can navigate the shark tank without bleeding. Brooke understands the stakes." Brooke Miller. The name hung in the air like toxic smoke. She was 24, an influencer with a degree in marketing, and a father who sat on the board of the city's largest bank. She was the shiny new hood ornament for Ethan's rapidly ascending vehicle of success. She was everything Rachel wasn't, loud, visible, and shallow enough to float. "She's very photogenic," Rachel said, finally looking up. Ethan bristled. "She's vital to the brand, Rachel. Perception is reality in this city. You never understood that. You wanted to focus on integrity and materials. Nobody cares about the concrete mix if the ribbon cutting isn't trending on social media." Rachel stood up slowly. The movement was graceful, deliberate. She picked up her purse, an old leather bag she'd had since college, the leather worn soft and buttery. "I understand the stakes, Ethan," Rachel said, her voice steady, surprisingly strong. "Better than you think. I understand that structures built on weak foundations always collapse, no matter how pretty the facade is. And I understand that you think you're trading up." Ethan chuckled, a condescending sound that grated against the silence. He stood as well, needing to be taller than her. "I'm not trading anything, Rachel. I'm evolving. Look, take the check. Get a nice apartment in the suburbs. Maybe take up pottery again. You were always good at that. Find a nice, quiet life where the pressure doesn't crush you." He extended a hand. It was a calculated move. He expected her to shake it, to validate his narrative that this was a mutual, mature decision. He wanted closure that made him look like the good guy to Noah, to the world, and mostly to himself. Rachel looked at his hand, the hand she had held through his father's funeral, the hand she had squeezed when his first firm went under, the hand she had loved. Then she looked up at his face. His eyes were blue, cold, and utterly empty of the warmth she had once thought was love. She saw him clearly for the first time in years, not as the genius architect, but as an insecure man terrified of being outshined, a man who had cannibalized her light to feed his own shadow. She didn't take his hand. She didn't even blink. "Goodbye, Ethan. Good luck with the merger." She turned and walked to the heavy oak door. Her gait was different. The shuffle of the broken wife was gone. In its place was a stride. Ethan frowned as the door clicked shut. The silence she left behind was heavy, charged with something he couldn't identify. How did she know about the merger? He muttered to Noah, a flicker of paranoia lighting up his eyes. We haven't announced the Hayes acquisition yet. That's strictly confidential. Did you tell her? Noah shrugged, sliding the signed papers into his briefcase with a crisp snap. I didn't say a word. Maybe she reads the financial section, or maybe she just guessed. Don't worry about her, Ethan. She's history. You've got a gala to prepare for. This weekend is your coronation. Focus on the future. Ethan smoothed his tie, looking at his reflection in the darkened window. The brief flicker of unease vanished as quickly as it had come, replaced by the towering ego that had built his career. You're right. She'll fade away. People like Rachel always do. They just disappear into the background. But outside, 45 floors down, the city wind was howling, dry and fierce, tearing through the streets like a wild animal. Rachel didn't hail a cab. She walked to the subway station, her heels clicking a rhythm on the pavement, a rhythm of war. She pulled her phone from her bag, her fingers hovering over the contacts. She stopped on a name she hadn't dialed in years. Allison, she said, when the line connected, her voice losing its softness, replacing it with the steel of a construction site foreman. It's Rachel. I'm out, and I'm ready to work. The loft was drafty, smelling of turpentine, old sawdust, and the metallic tang of graphite, a stark contrast to the antiseptic luxury of the penthouse she had shared with Ethan. But to Rachel, it smelled like oxygen. It smelled like freedom. 6 months had passed since the signature in the lawyer's office. 6 months of instant noodles, sleeping on a mattress on the floor, and working 18-hour days. Rachel stood before a drafting table that spanned the length of the main industrial window. The afternoon sun, harsh and unfiltered, illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. Pinned to the walls were not pottery sketches or watercolor landscapes, but complex architectural schematics, aggressive structural designs, and branding strategies that looked like battle plans. Ethan had forgotten, or perhaps he had never cared to know, that before Rachel was his supporter, she was a scholarship student at the top design institute in the country. She was the one who had corrected his thesis. She was the one who had solved the load-bearing issue on the Weston Bridge project, though his name was on the plaque. She had buried that part of herself to be the wife he wanted, shrinking herself to fit into his shadow. But shadows cannot exist without light, and the light was back. The structural integrity of the West Wing is compromised if you use that material, a voice said from the doorway, deep and resonant. Rachel didn't jump. She didn't gasp. She turned slowly, caping her pen, to see a man standing there. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than her entire settlement check, but he wore it with the casual indifference of someone who had nothing to prove. He had dark, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, and a stillness about him that commanded the chaotic room. The carbon fiber composite handles the load distribution, Rachel countered, her voice steady, locking eyes with him. It's not just aesthetic. It's a suspension system. It mimics the bone density of a bird's wing. It bends. It doesn't break. The man stepped into the room, stepping over a stack of books on brutalist architecture. This was Wright, the billionaire tech mogul known for his reclusive nature and his ruthless eye for innovation. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be in Silicon Valley, or Tokyo, or on a private island, buying governments. You're Rachel Coleman, Lucas said, finally looking at her. He didn't look at her like a woman in a dusty loft. He looked at her like she was a code he was trying to crack. And you're lost, Rachel replied, crossing her arms. The art gallery opening is 2 floors down. This is a workspace. I saw your portfolio, the one you submitted anonymously to the Vertex competition, Lucas said, ignoring her deflection. He walked to the wall, studying a rendering of a twisted steel tower. It was brilliant and angry. There's a lot of rage in these lines, Miss Coleman. It's not rage, Rachel said, moving to cover the schematics, feeling exposed. It's efficiency, removing the unnecessary to reveal the essential. Rage is messy. My work is precise. Lucas smiled, a genuine, rare expression that transformed his face. That sounds like something a person who just shed a lot of dead weight would say. He knew. Of course he knew. Men like Lucas Wright didn't walk into dusty lofts in the garment district without a dossier. What do you want, Mr. Wright? Lucas. And I want to know why the ex-wife of Ethan Moore, a man whose architectural firm produces the most derivative, safe corporate boxes in the city, is hiding a genius-level talent for avant-garde structural design. Rachel felt the old shame prickle, the voice of Ethan telling her she was too much, too weird, too intense. She pushed it down. Ethan liked things. Predictable. He liked straight lines. I made him uncomfortable because I like curves and chaos. Mediocrity is always threatened by excellence, Lucas said, walking to the window and looking out at the skyline, specifically at a building Ethan had designed. I'm building something, Rachel, a legacy project, the Zenith Center. Everyone thinks I'm hiring Starlight Architects, Ethan's firm. They're the safe choice. The board wants them. They are, Rachel admitted, leaning against her table. Ethan will give you exactly what you expect. It will be under budget, on time, and completely soulless. It will look great on a brochure and feel like a tomb when you walk inside. Lucas turned back to her, the sunlight catching the sharp angle of his cheekbone. I don't want safe. I want the person who designed this. He tapped the blueprint on her table, the bird wing suspension system. I want you to be the lead consultant, but there's a catch. There's always a catch with men like you. You have to come out of hiding. The annual Architects' Gala is this Saturday. Ethan will be there. The press will be there. If we do this, we announce it there. We walk in together, and we drop the bomb. Rachel's stomach tightened. The gala. It was the event Ethan had been bragging about for months, the night he planned to solidify his status as the city's golden boy with Brooke on his arm. It was the arena he ruled. He thinks I'm broken, Rachel whispered, looking at her hands that were stained with ink now, not dish soap. He thinks I'm in the suburbs making clay bowls and crying over wedding photos. Then let's prove him wrong, Lucas said, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch. Let's show him that while he was playing checkers, you were building the board. Let's show him what happens when you underestimate the architect. Rachel looked at the work on her walls. The designs were bold, fearless, dangerous. They were her. I don't have a dress, she said, a small smile playing on her lips. Lucas pulled a black card from his pocket and placed it on the drafting table next to her X-Acto knife. Get the best one. Put it on my tab. I'll pick you up at 7. Don't be late. The grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum was a cavern of gold and velvet, a temple erected to wealth and ego. Chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a warm, expensive glow over the city's elite. The air smelled of expensive perfume, aged champagne, and raw ambition. Ethan Moore stood near the center of the room, the gravitational center of his own universe. He held a glass of scotch in his hand, swirling the amber liquid. He looked impeccable in a custom tuxedo, the lapels sharp enough to bleed on. Beside him, Brooke Miller shimmered in a silver sequined gown that was more skin than fabric. She was laughing at something Oliver Hayes was saying, her head thrown back, neck exposed, capturing the perfect angle for the photographers hovering nearby. You've outdone yourself, Ethan. Benjamin Scott, a potential investor worth $3 billion, said, shaking Ethan's hand firmly. The rumors are that you're locking down the Wright account? That would be the contract of the decade. Ethan smirked, taking a sip of his drink. The burn of the alcohol felt like victory. Let's just say, Lucas Wright and I speak the same language. Success. We expect to close the deal tonight. My team has prepared a presentation that is undeniable. He's elusive, Benjamin warned, glancing around the crowded room. Hasn't been seen in public in months. Some say he's looking for a new direction. He'll be here, Ethan assured him, his voice oozing confidence. He needs a firm with stability, a firm with a face he can trust. And let's be honest, Ben, who else is there? The competition is non-existent. He scanned the room, feeling like a king surveying his kingdom. He thought fleetingly of Rachel. She was probably at home in some cramped apartment, watching Netflix, maybe drinking a glass of cheap box wine. The thought gave him a twisted sense of satisfaction. He had shed the dead weight, and look how high he had soared. He was lighter without her. Suddenly, the ambient chatter in the room dropped. It wasn't a gradual hush, it was a sudden, sharp silence that started near the massive double doors at the top of the grand staircase and rippled outward like a shock wave. The jazz band faltered, a saxophone note hanging awkwardly in the air before dying out. Ethan turned, annoyed. What is going on? Did the mayor arrive? Or is it a protest? I don't think that's the mayor, Brooke whispered, her grip on his arm tightening, her nails digging into his suit jacket. Ethan, look. At the top of the stairs stood Lucas Wright. He looked formidable, a titan of industry in a black tuxedo that fit him like armor. He radiated power. But no one was looking at Lucas. They were looking at the woman on his arm. She wore a gown of deep, midnight blue velvet that seemed to absorb the light and reflect it back as starlight. It was strapless, structured like a corset, revealing toned shoulders and a posture so regal it made everyone else in the room look like they were slouching. The dress flowed down like liquid water, pooling slightly at her feet. Her hair, usually pulled back in a messy bun, cascaded in sleek, dark waves over one shoulder. Her makeup was sharp, accentuating eyes that scanned the crowd with predatory intelligence. It took Ethan a full 10 seconds to recognize her. His brain refused to process the visual data. The glass slipped from his hand. It hit the carpet with a dull thud, spilling 20-year-old scotch over his polished shoes. But he didn't notice. He couldn't feel his feet. "Rachel," he breathed, the word strangling him. She began to descend the stairs, her hand resting lightly on Lucas's arm. She didn't look down to watch her step. She looked straight ahead. The transformation was total. The mousy, quiet wife, who apologized for taking up space, was gone. In her place was a queen who owned the space. "Who is that?" Oliver Hayes asked, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly open. "She's stunning. I didn't know Wright was seeing anyone." "That," Ethan rasped, his face draining of color, his heart hammering a panic rhythm against his ribs, "is my ex-wife." Brooke made a noise of disbelief, a choked little laugh. "The pottery girl? No way. She looks expensive. She looks dangerous." As Rachel and Lucas reached the floor, the crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. It wasn't just the billionaire's presence. It was the energy radiating off Rachel. It was a gravitational pull. She moved with a kinetic energy that Ethan recognized. It was the same energy she used to have when they were students, before he had dimmed her light. Ethan felt a surge of panic rising in his chest, a cold, clawing thing. This wasn't the script. She was supposed to be broken. She was supposed to be invisible. Why was she here? And why was she with Lucas Wright, the very man Ethan needed to secure his future. He watched as Lucas leaned in and whispered something to Rachel. She threw her head back and laughed, not a polite, stifled giggle, but a rich, confident sound that carried across the silent room. It was a laugh of genuine joy. Then she turned her head. Her eyes locked with Ethan's across the ballroom. There was no fear in them, no longing, no sadness. There was only a cool, terrifying amusement. She held his gaze for a heartbeat, measuring him, weighing him, and finding him wanting. Then she dismissed him, turning her back to greet a senator who had rushed over to shake Lucas's hand. Ethan felt sweat prickle his hairline. The air in the ballroom suddenly felt very thin, very hot. "This is a mistake," Ethan muttered, stepping forward, his instincts screaming at him to intervene, to assert control. "She's up to something. She doesn't belong here." "Ethan, don't," Brooke hissed, grabbing his arm, her eyes darting around at the watching crowd. "You'll make a scene. Everyone is watching." "I have to fix this," he snapped, shaking her off. "She's going to ruin everything." He began to push through the crowd, his heart hammering against his ribs. He didn't know what he was going to say, but he knew one thing. The woman on the stairs was a threat. And Ethan Moore destroyed threats. But as he drew closer, fighting the tide of people moving toward her, he realized with a sinking dread that he was no longer the protagonist of this story. He was just a spectator in hers. And the show was just beginning. The cocktail hour had transformed from a social gathering into a spectator sport. The magnetic field of the room had shifted entirely to the corner where Lucas Wright and Rachel Coleman held court. Waiters circled them like moths, offering hors d'oeuvres that went untouched. Ethan Moore stood 10 feet away, blocked by a wall of bodies, admirers, opportunists, and the curious elite. He watched, seething, as Rachel spoke to the head of the Urban Planning Commission. Her hands moved gracefully, sketching concepts in the air. She wasn't just standing there as arm candy. She was engaging. "Ethan," a voice grated in his ear. It was Paige Robinson, a gossip columnist for the city's most vicious tabloid. "Is it true? The mystery woman on Wright's arm is the former Mrs. Moore?" Ethan plastered on a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Hello, Paige. Yes, that's Rachel. Though I admit, I'm as surprised as you are to see her here. It's not really her scene." Paige scribbled something on her notepad, her eyes gleaming. "She seems to have adapted quickly. Word is, Lucas hasn't let go of her arm all night. Is this a romantic revenge plot? Or did you let a diamond slip through your fingers?" "Rachel and I want different things," Ethan said tightly. "I wish her the best, obviously. But I worry she's out of her depth. Lucas Wright eats people alive." "She looks like she's doing the eating," Paige countered, nodding toward the pair. Ethan couldn't take it anymore. He excused himself and shoved past a waiter, finally breaching the inner circle. "Rachel," he said, his voice loud enough to cut through the conversation. The circle went quiet. Lucas Wright turned his gaze toward Ethan. It was like being looked at by a glamour, cold, heavy, and indifferent. Rachel turned slowly, holding her champagne flute by the stem. "Ethan," she said. Her voice was steady, lacking the tremor he was used to inducing. "You look well." We need to talk," Ethan stammered, his usual charisma evaporating under Lucas's scrutiny. "Privately." "I don't think that's necessary," Lucas interjected, his voice a low baritone. "Anything you have to say to Miss Coleman, you can say in front of me." Ethan bristled, trying to regain his footing. "This is a family matter, right?" "We aren't family, Ethan," Rachel corrected gently. "Not anymore. You made sure of that with the expedited filing. Remember?" A titter of laughter ran through the bystanders. Ethan's face flushed red. He looked at Brooke, who was hovering nervously behind him, looking small and insignificant compared to Rachel's commanding presence. "I'm just concerned, Rach." Ethan tried a different angle, the benevolent protector. "This world, it's intense. I don't want you getting hurt or used." Rachel took a step forward, closing the distance. She smelled of jasmine and ozone, a sharp, electric scent. "Used? Like I was for 7 years? When I ghost-designed your submissions for the city centre project? Or when I wrote your keynote speeches?" The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan's jaw dropped. She wasn't supposed to say that. That was their secret. The unwritten contract of their marriage. "You're drunk," Ethan hissed. "I'm sober, Ethan." She smiled, ice in her veins. "And I'm finally awake." Lucas placed a hand on the small of Rachel's back. "Mr. Moore, I think you should return to your date. We have business to discuss with Mr. Scott." Benjamin Scott, the investor Ethan had been wooing all night, stepped out from behind Lucas, nodding at Rachel. Indeed. Rachel was just explaining her theory on sustainable brutalism. "Fascinating stuff, Ethan. Why did you never tell me your wife was the vision behind your early work?" Ethan felt the ground crumble. His narrative was unraveling in real time. It was a collaborative effort." "Gentlemen," Rachel said, turning away, dismissing him completely. "Shall we get some fresh air?" As they walked away, Ethan stood frozen. He wasn't just losing face, he was losing his business credibility, and the terrifying realization hit him. Rachel wasn't just attending the gala, she was the gala. The narrative of Ethan's success had always been built on a lie. The myth of the singular genius. Later that night, in the smoking lounge, Ethan downed his third scotch. The room was dark, filled with leather chairs and the scent of expensive cigars. Oliver Hayes sat opposite him, looking unimpressed. "You have a problem, Ethan," Oliver said, cutting the end of a cigar. "She's bluffing," Ethan snapped. "She's trying to embarrass me. She doesn't have the stamina for this. Tomorrow she'll go back to being a nobody." "You aren't listening," Oliver leaned forward. "I just got off the phone with my contact at the registrar's office. Lucas Wright filed for a new corporation 3 days ago. Vertex Solutions. The primary shareholder is Wright, the CEO, Rachel Coleman." Ethan choked on his drink. "CEO? She's never run a business in her life." "Maybe not, but she ran yours, didn't she?" Oliver's eyes were hard. "I looked back at your portfolio, Ethan. The decline in quality over the last 6 months, since the separation, is statistically significant. Your designs became flat, safe." Ethan slammed his glass down. "I am the talent. She helped with the drafting." "Did she?" Oliver asked, skepticism dripping from his tone. "Because Benjamin Scott just pulled his verbal commitment to your firm. He's scheduling a meeting with Vertex on Monday." Ethan felt a cold sweat break out on his back. He remembered the nights during their marriage. He would come home exhausted, complaining about a design block. Rachel would make him tea, sit him down, and then gently, quietly, sketch on a napkin. "What if you moved the cantilever here?" she would ask. "What if you opened the atrium to the north light?" He had taken those napkins, he had turned them into award-winning buildings, and he had convinced himself that because he held the pen for the final draft, the ideas were his. He had convinced her of it too, or so he thought. "Why did you leave her, really?" Oliver asked. "If she was the golden goose?" "She was dragging me down." Ethan repeated the mantra he had told himself 1,000 times. "She was too cautious. She didn't like the spotlight. I needed someone who looked the part." "Well," Oliver stood up, brushing ash from his lapel. "She looks the part now, and she's coming for your throat. If you want to survive this, you better stop treating her like an ex-wife and start treating her like a competitor. A dangerous one." Ethan sat alone in the gloom. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his photos until he found an old one. Rachel, wearing paint-splattered overalls, smiling shyly at the camera in their first apartment. She looked so harmless. "You want a war, Rachel?" he whispered to the screen. "Fine, I'll burn you down." Sunday morning broke with a headache and a strategy. Ethan knew he couldn't beat Rachel on the drafting table, not if she was truly the genius behind his best work. He had to beat her in the mud. He called Alison Grant. Alison was an old acquaintance, a PR fixer who specialized in reputation management, which was a polite way of saying character assassination. "I need dirt," Ethan said, skipping the pleasantries. "Rachel Coleman, anything from her past, mental instability, financial debts, family secrets. I don't care." "Ethan, darling," Alison purred over the line. "I saw the photos from the gala. She looked like a goddess. The internet is already calling her the Count of Monte Cristo in couture. Are you sure you want to poke the bear?" "She's a fraud," Ethan lied. "She's manipulating Wright. I'm trying to save him from a mistake. Just find something." By Tuesday, Alison had a file. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a man desperate to regain control. It contained records of Rachel's therapy sessions from 3 years ago, visits for anxiety and depression. It also had a twisted version of her departure from her first job, painting her as difficult to work with. Ethan leaked it. On Wednesday, the headline on a prominent industry blog read, "From housewife to head honcho. Is Rachel Coleman unstable? Sources say Wright's new CEO has a history of mental volatility." Ethan sat in his office, waiting for the fallout. He expected Vertex to panic. He expected Lucas to distance himself to protect his stock price. He expected Rachel to crumble, to hide, to cry. Instead, his receptionist buzzed him. "Mr. Moore, turn on the TV. Channel 5. Ethan grabbed the remote. There was Rachel, sitting in a bright studio for a live interview. She wore a sharp white suit, looking calm and collected. "The rumors?" the interviewer asked. "The leaked medical records suggesting you struggled with depression?" Ethan leaned forward, smiling. "Here it comes. The denial. The breakdown." Rachel looked directly into the camera. "They aren't rumors. They are true." Ethan's smile faltered. 3 years ago, I was in a marriage where I was constantly told I wasn't enough. Rachel continued, her voice resonating with power. I was minimized, gaslit, and professionally stifled. Yes, I suffered from depression. I went to therapy. I rebuilt myself. That isn't a weakness, Jim. It's a qualification. It means I know how to survive a collapse and build something stronger from the rubble. That is exactly what I do with buildings, and it's what I do with business. The interviewer looked stunned, then impressed. "So you're saying your past makes you a better CEO?" "I'm saying that a woman who has walked through hell and come out holding the map is not someone you want to bet against." Ethan watched as the live feed comments rolled in on the side of the screen. "Queen. Legend. I'd hire her. Who is the ex? He sounds like a monster. Like a..." Then Rachel dropped the hammer. "And regarding the claims that I was difficult to work with, I'm releasing my original sketches for the Skyline project and the Omni Tower today. The metadata proves they were created on my personal server 2 years before my ex-husband's firm claimed credit for them." Ethan scrambled for his phone, his hands shaking. The Omni Tower was his flagship project. It was the reason he was on the cover of Architectural Digest. "I never wanted credit," Rachel said on screen, her eyes piercing through the pixels. "I just wanted to be heard. But if my competence is being questioned, I will bring the receipts." Ethan's phone began to ring. It was Oliver Hayes, then Benjamin Scott, then the board of directors of his own firm. The sabotage hadn't just failed, it had backfired with the force of a nuclear detonation. Ethan Moore hadn't dug Rachel's grave. He had just handed her a shovel to bury him. By Friday, the atmosphere in the city's financial district was electric, vibrating with a tension that seemed to hum through the steel and glass canyons. The leak of the sketches had caused a scandal that went far beyond the tawdry speculation of gossip columns. It had metastasized into a crisis of intellectual property and corporate fraud. Ethan's firm, Starlight Architects, once the unassailable titan of the skyline, was hemorrhaging clients faster than a severed artery. Phones rang unanswered in his office, and the inbox that used to overflow with gala invitations was now clogged with legal notices and contract terminations. But the final nail in the coffin was yet to be driven. The meeting was set for 10 a.m. in the boardroom of the Zenith Tower, Lucas Wright's territory. It was ostensibly to discuss the final bid for the new city stadium, a project worth billions that would redefine the city's waterfront. Ethan had been invited, a courtesy extended by the city council due to his firm's incumbency. Though as he rode the silent, high-speed elevator upward, he felt less like a contender and more like a prisoner walking to the gallows. He adjusted his tie in the mirrored reflection of the elevator doors. His face looked gaunt, the stress of the last week carving deep lines around his mouth. He had spent the night rehearsing his pitch, trying to convince himself that his charm could still bend reality to his will. "I am Ethan Moore," he told himself. "I build monuments." But the voice in his head sounded thin, drowned out by the memory of Rachel's face on the news, calm and terrifyingly competent. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the reception of Vertex Solutions. It was a space that screamed future, minimalist, flooded with natural light, and buzzing with quiet, purposeful energy. He was led into the boardroom, a glass-walled sanctuary overlooking the very city he thought he owned. At the head of the table sat Lucas Wright, looking like a modern-day Caesar in a suit cut from midnight fabric. To his right sat Benjamin Scott, his face unreadable, and the 3 city commissioners who held the fate of the stadium in their hands. And at the other end, standing before a massive digital display wall, was Rachel. She wore black today, a sharp, tailored suit that seemed to absorb the light, severe yet undeniably elegant. Her hair was pulled back, revealing the sharp line of her jaw. She didn't look at Ethan as he took his seat. She didn't flinch. She was in the middle of a presentation, her laser pointer dancing across a complex 3D rendering of the waterfront. "The traditional approach," Rachel was saying, her voice clear and resonant, devoid of the hesitation that used to plague her when she spoke to him about dinner plans. She gestured to a rendering on the left side of the screen, a rendering that looked suspiciously like Ethan's submission. "Prioritizes vertical dominance and static capacity. It's an ego trip in steel, designed to look impressive from a helicopter, but oppressive from the street. It creates a heat island, blocks airflow to the residential district, and ignores the floodplain realities of the next 50 years. Ethan stiffened. She was dissecting his masterpiece with surgical precision. "But the community needs horizontal integration," Rachel continued, tapping the screen. The image shifted to a design that took the breath away. It was organic, fluid, weaving green spaces into the structure like veins in a leaf. It didn't sit on the city. It grew out of it. "We propose a stadium that breathes. We call it the lung." She swiped her hand, and the simulation animated. "Using a kinetic facade and the carbon fiber suspension system we've patented, the stadium adjusts its porosity based on wind conditions. It harvests energy. It cools the surrounding 3 blocks by 4 degrees. It is not just a venue. It is an environmental engine." The commissioners were leaning forward, their eyes wide. This wasn't just architecture. It was alchemy. "This is Vertex's proposal," Rachel said, turning to face the room. "It costs 15% less than the competitor's bid because we aren't wasting materials on vanity. We are spending on efficiency." The silence that followed was heavy. Commissioner Vance, a stern woman known for her skepticism, turned slowly to Ethan. "Mr. Moore, your proposal was significantly more expensive. And during our preliminary review, you assured us that the static mass was necessary for structural integrity. Vertex seems to have solved that load-bearing issue with half the steel. Can you explain the discrepancy?" Ethan stood up, his legs feeling like lead. He smoothed his jacket, relying on muscle memory. "Commissioners, quality costs money. We use proven methods, time-tested materials. Ms. Coleman's design is strictly theoretical. It's experimental. It's risky. Do you want to gamble billions of taxpayer dollars on unproven science?" "Risk is the price of evolution," Lucas interjected calmly, not even looking up from his tablet. "I've reviewed the engineering. It's sound. In fact, it's the same engineering logic used in the Omni Tower Foundation, the very foundation that has withstood 2 hurricanes." He paused, finally looking at Ethan, "which, as we now know, was designed by Ms. Coleman." The room went silent. The accusation hung in the air, validated by the silence. It wasn't just a point of order, it was a character judgment. Ethan looked at Benjamin Scott, his last hope, the man he had wined and dined for years. "Ben, we have a history. You know I deliver." Benjamin adjusted his glasses, looking uncomfortable but resolute. "We do, Ethan. And I've made a lot of money with you. But business is about the future, not the past. And frankly, looking at these 2 designs side by side, it's clear where the talent was residing in your household all along. One is a monument to the 1990s. The other is the future." Ethan felt the walls closing in. He looked at the screen, at the beautiful, breathing structure Rachel had created. He realized then that he had never really seen her. He had seen a function, a support system, a wife. He hadn't seen the visionary. And now, that visionary was burying him. Rachel stepped forward, her expression softening just a fraction, not with pity, but with a professional finality. "This isn't about the past, Ethan. I'm not here to destroy you. I'm here to build this stadium. You can withdraw your bid with dignity, citing a strategic pivot for your firm, or we can let the board vote right now and have the rejection on public record." It was a mercy kill. She was offering him a way out, a chance to save a shred of his reputation, to spin the narrative rather than be crushed by it. Ethan looked at the woman he had discarded. He saw the strength in her jaw, the fire in her eyes. He realized that the ambition he had worshipped, the hunger for status, for the corner office, for the applause, was hollow compared to the ambition of creation that she possessed. He was a salesman. She was an architect. Ethan's voice cracked. He cleared his throat, trying to salvage the remnants of his pride. He looked at the faces around the table. They were looking at him with pity. Pity was worse than hate. Pity was the end of a career. "Starlight Architects withdraws its bid," Ethan whispered, the words tasting like ash. He sat down. A man collapsed in upon himself. Rachel nodded once, acknowledging the surrender, and turned back to the screen as if he were no longer in the room. "Now," she said, her voice picking up the energy, "let's discuss the sustainability protocols for the kinetic roof." She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just went back to work. The meeting adjourned an hour later. The deal was signed. Vertex Solutions had the contract. Ethan lingered in the lobby of the Zenith Tower. He told himself he was waiting for his driver, but he knew he was waiting for her. He needed one last moment, one final attempt to understand what had happened. Rachel exited the elevators alone. Lucas had given her space. a silent act of trust. She saw Ethan standing by the revolving doors. She didn't slow down, but she didn't avoid him. "You won," Ethan said as she approached. "It wasn't a game, Ethan," Rachel replied, stopping. "That was the problem. For you, everything was a scoreboard. For me, it was my life." "I made you," Ethan said, the words bitter and desperate. "I gave you the connections, the lifestyle." "You hid me," Rachel corrected, her voice soft but unyielding. "You put me in a glass box and told me it was a castle. You convinced me that my light would blind people, so I had to dim it. But the only person it blinded was you." Ethan stepped closer, his eyes searching hers for a trace of the woman who used to make him coffee and listen to his rants. "I miss you, Rach. The money, the fame. It's lonely. Brooke left me this morning, by the way. Said I was bad for her brand." Rachel let out a short, dry laugh. "I'm sorry, Ethan, but I can't fix you. I spent 7 years trying. You have to fix yourself." "Give me another chance," Ethan pleaded. "We were a team. We can be a power couple. Imagine what we could do now that I know what you're capable of." Rachel looked at him with a profound sadness. It was the look one gives to a child who has broken a toy they were told to be careful with. "I'm a power couple," Rachel said, gesturing to herself. "Me and the woman I fought to become. I don't need you to complete the picture anymore." A sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down, and Lucas nodded to her. Not possessive, just present. "Goodbye, Ethan," Rachel said. She walked out the door into the bright, harsh sunlight of the city. She didn't look back. Ethan watched her go. He saw his reflection in the glass of the revolving door. He looked older, smaller. For the first time in his life, he was truly alone. The opening of the Zenith Stadium was not just an event. It was a coronation for the city itself. The structure rose from the waterfront like a living thing, a weave of steel and glass and vertical gardens that seemed to defy gravity. As the sun began to set, the kinetic facade shifted, rippling like scales in the evening breeze, capturing the dying light and scattering it in a kaleidoscope of amber and gold across the bay. 50,000 people filled the stands, the roar of the crowd vibrating through the concrete. But up on the VIP terrace, the air was cool and smelled of expensive champagne and victory. Rachel Coleman stood at the edge of the balcony, overlooking the masterpiece she had birthed from a sketch on a napkin. She wore a gown of white silk that moved with the wind, making her look like an extension of the building itself. She held a glass of sparkling water, the condensation cool against her fingertips. She didn't need the alcohol. The adrenaline of the moment, the sheer reality of the steel and stone, was the most potent intoxicant she had ever known. "It turned out well," Lucas said, coming up beside her. He leaned his elbows on the railing, looking out not at the crowd, but at the structure itself. "It turned out perfect," Rachel corrected him, a smile touching her lips. "Better than the simulations. Look at how the wind funnels through the north quadrant. The passive cooling is working at 98% efficiency." Lucas chuckled, shaking his head. "Only you would be analyzing the HVAC efficiency, while 50,000 people are screaming your name." "Someone has to mind the details," she said, turning to him. They had built a company together, Vertex Solutions, which now employed 300 people and had contracts in Tokyo, London, and Dubai. But more importantly, they had built a partnership. They hadn't rushed into a romance. They were too smart, too wounded by their pasts for that. They had built a foundation first, based on respect, intellectual challenge, and absolute honesty. The romance had followed, slow and steady, like the rising of a skyscraper, grounded in something real. "Did you see the guest list?" Lucas asked, his voice lowering. "I saw it," Rachel said, her gaze drifting to the general admission gates far below. Ethan Moore was down there. He wasn't in the VIP box. He wasn't even in the club seating. He was somewhere in the sea of faces, a spectator in the world he used to think he ruled. Starlight Architects had dissolved 6 months ago, crushed under the weight of the scandal and the exodus of talent. Ethan was consulting now, working for a mid-tier firm in the suburbs that specialized in strip malls and office parks. Rumor had it, he was actually drawing his own designs again. They weren't brilliant. They were functional, safe, and entirely forgettable, but they were his. In a way, his fall had been the most honest thing that had ever happened to him. "Do you want to go say hello?" Lucas asked, watching her carefully. "We could have security bring him up." Rachel looked down at the masses, trying to find a familiar face, but saw only a blur of humanity. She felt for the old pang of anger, the resentment, the need for validation, but there was nothing. Just a quiet, spacious peace. "No," she said softly. "I have nothing left to say to the past. I'm too busy looking at the view." She looked up at the skyline. She saw her building, her city, her future. She wasn't the woman who broke after the divorce. She wasn't even the woman who sought revenge. She was the woman who broke out. She was the architect of her own life. She reached out and took Lucas's hand. His grip was warm and solid, an anchor that didn't hold her down but gave her a place to launch from. "Ready for the keynote?" he asked. "The mayor is about to introduce you." "Always," Rachel said. She turned away from the railing, the wind catching her hair. As she walked toward the stage, her heels clicking on the concrete, she felt the vibration of the crowd. It was a rhythm of victory, of resilience, and of unshakable power. The stage lights hit her, blinding and bright. For a second, she couldn't see anything. But she didn't blink. She didn't look for a shadow to hide in. She stepped into the center of the light, raised her head, and for the first time in her life, she truly shone. Rachel didn't just survive the fire, she used it to forge a steel spine. Her story reminds us that when someone tells you you're too much or not enough, they are usually projecting their own limitations onto you. Don't let anyone draft the blueprints of your life but you. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and turning the tables, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this with someone who needs a reminder of their own power, and subscribe for more stories about the human spirit. Until next time, keep building your own empire.